Well, welcome to the panel on how VA is improving care with maker tactics and technology. As chairman of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, much of my work in Congress is dedicated to understanding and helping to support great work being done by VA medical providers to care for our veterans. Additionally, we'll get to hear from Dr. Evans from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, otherwise known as Nist, a late but valuable addition to the panel who can speak on how government can solicit ideas from the maker community in the work that you're doing. Now, I regularly talk with the VA administrator in charge of VA healthcare, Dr. Stone, who leads the entire VHA. It was he who first told me about all the great work being done at VA. And I'm excited to have Dr. Vega and Dr. Ripley here to talk with us. Now, I'd like to give a bit of background about all of our panelists. So first, Dr. Ryan Vega. Dr. Vega serves as the Executive Director for the VHA Innovation Ecosystem within the Office of Discovery, Education, and Affiliate Networks. In this role, he oversees a portfolio of activities focused on both grassroots and strategic initiatives, workforce development, and strategic partnerships to advance the development and incorporation of emerging healthcare technology and solutions in VA to advance clinical care and service for our nation's veterans. Dr. Beth Ripley is the head for VHA 3D Printing Network and the chair for the VHA 3D Printing Advisory Committee. Dr. Ripley collaborates with a talented and diverse group of physicians, orthotists, prosthetists, engineers, administrators, and information technologists across the VA system, who together are reimagining the meaning of individualized patient care through 3D printing. Dr. Ripley's work with the VHA 3D Printing Advisory Committee aims to understand how patient-specific 3D printing can improve the safety and quality of diagnoses and interventions such as surgery and minimally invasive procedures, improve patient education, shared decision-making and informed consent, and how to improve how patients engage with their surroundings. Dr. Heather Evans is a senior program analyst with the Program Coordination Office in the Director's Office at Nist. She covers policy and strategic issues in many areas, including nanotechnology, bioscience, advanced manufacturing, data policy, and open innovation. As the Nist lead for prize competitions, she's putting in place institute-wide best practices and policies after managing Nist's first ever prize competition to spur the development of mobile apps using Nist data. Amazing panelists we have here today, and I'm always amazed at the talent our country has. Never bet against America prevailing. So first, let me just open up with this first question for our panelists. First, I want to ask Dr. Vega or Dr. Ripley, or both, can you give us some background on how VA is using new manufacturing tools and techniques often associated with the maker movement to improve how care is delivered at VA? What applications are you already seeing success with? What applications do you hope to see success with in the near or long-term future? So why don't we start with that?
Sure, I can take a first stab at that. One of the great things about VA with respect to 3D printing is we're not new to this. We have a few hospitals that have been 3D printing close to a decade now. And one of the, again, very interesting things about that is it really started in the assistive technology space. So these were engineers and clinicians at the front lines trying to understand how to create really custom specific devices to help veterans getting back to doing the things they love. Anything from a pool cue enhancer that allows a veteran with a tremor to play pool again, to a makeup application brush for another veteran with disability in the hand. Just basically anything you could imagine. And that's sort of grown. So that's our roots. And it's a little bit different than a lot of other hospitals that really started in the pre-surgical planning space. We do a lot of that work now in VA. We're using 3D printing to create graspable objects such as your heart. Let's say if you got imaged and you were looking at your heart valve, we can make your heart, give it to you to understand what's wrong, and give it to your surgeon so that they can plan for better informed surgery. We use it for dentistry, orthotics, prosthetics, and beyond. And we could probably get into it, all the different things that we can do with it in the future. But most recently, COVID-19 has asked us to reimagine again how 3D printing is being used for healthcare. And we're making things like surgical masks and face shields. And, when there was more of a ventilator shortage, yes. And Dr. Vega, tell them what you have.
Hey, and thanks, Chairman Takano and everyone on the line. It's a pleasure to be with you. So I'm holding up an actual Papper hood that Beth and her team has developed out at the Puget Sound VA. I think, just echoing off of Beth's comments, one of the most important things about our journey to getting to where we are was really focusing on the fundamentals around this technology, really valuing the technology as an enabler, but building the infrastructure, building the community, engaging the community, and really advancing the idea of design and evaluation, bringing that into the hospital at the point of care with the veterans or the clinicians so that we really can enable an advanced care and service. I think, you see our ability to sort of pivot in the times of COVID and to create Papper hoods when we know that there's a shortage. A lot of that comes from the ability to have this type of community and the engagement so that we're sharing designs and learning from one another. I think that fundamentally is perhaps more important than the printer itself. It certainly is a requirement, but it's that connection points, that community that really allows us to leverage this expertise in advance. And as Beth was talking about pre-surgical planning, I'm holding up, this is actually the vasculature of a veteran's liver that was used in pre-surgical planning to help navigate a repair of a liver lobe. So it's quite amazing what technology has allowed us to do.
That pre-surgical planning, I remember touring, I don't know if it was your facility, Dr. Ripley.
It was, yes.
It was. I was just amazed at how you use this technology to do the pre-surgical planning. But I'm hearing that VA researchers are poised to be printing bone or something like that. Is that right? I'm
Yeah.
almost like kind of incredulous asking the question, but it seems way futuristic to be printing out like these sort of body parts.
Yeah, we're very excited about that. And yes, we are. We have a few bioprinters throughout the network. Makers will enjoy this because you can print just about anything, right? We know you can print food. My dad just texted me, I guess they're working in Russia diligently on printing chicken McNuggets. But, frosting, buildings, cement, you name it. And so why not? Why not bone? And so we're working within the VA on making bone, but not just any bone. This is vascularized living bone. And, I think one of the most important things for this maker community is really understanding who we're making for. So we sat down with the surgeons early on and asked them about some of the toughest cases, like what keeps you up at night? What are the types of cases that are so challenging that, you actually still maybe feel nervous going in, even though you've been doing this for 20 years? What are those cases? And, they told us about a surgery with the jaw. If you have loss of bone in the jaw, either from, trauma, think about the traumas in the battle of war, It could be tumor, it could be infection, anything that causes damage to this bone. You don't want to go throughout life without that. So they want to replace it. And right now you have to go and take the bone from somewhere else. So they're often taking a bone from the leg. You could take a rib, you could take part of your shoulder blade, but it's really challenging and difficult. So they said, can you make us bone that will fill in a gap, custom to fit whatever that gap is? And by the way, it needs to be vascularized and living, because the body just doesn't do well when you put non-living things into it. So we said, okay, well, let's try to figure it out. So we are actively engaged in printing from demineralized bone matrix, which is really just pulverized bone with some small micro vessels thrown in and some collagen. And this is actually a great example of a public-private partnership. So we've partnered with a company, Advanced Solutions Life Sciences, that has the capability and the know-how to do this. And we're laser focused together on getting to that clinical outcome, which is to be able to make that for a veteran, get it into the clinical practice in the next couple of years.
Wow. Well, Dr. Vega or Dr. Ripley, how did the core team of healthcare makers like yourself come together? How were you able to identify other VA staff who wanted to participate in this type of work?
Ryan, you want to answer? Or?
Yeah, sure. So I think it sort of goes back to really investing in that fundamental concept of the workforce, right? Enabling the workforce to be supported in their, I'll call it the adventure of utilizing 3D printing or additive manufacturing, and really fostering a network of both internal and external collaborations and folks who are really interested in it. So when you had a hospital in the VA that emerges and says, hey, we'd really like to get involved, we connect them to folks, whether it's other VA medical centers that are doing this or even external partners who have knowledge. And as that network sort of grew and emerged, we really were able to solidify a true ecosystem, right? Both internal and external of innovators, of scientists, of clinicians, of biomedical engineers, and of just people who really enjoyed this somewhat as a hobby. And what emerged was sites that really were utilizing this in an advanced way and doing so, creating new use cases, things we never even thought about, additive manufacturing serving a purpose of in a hospital. And through that, new and emerging leaders within the VA sort of kind of stood out. And it really, and I say it wasn't hard, but it was just years of sort of investing in the community and that community engagement that allowed us to have a robust network where that talent just emerged sort of organically.
Thank you, Dr. Vega. I want to turn to Dr. Evans. Can you talk a bit about the work that Nist is doing to support makers, especially those makers that are working in healthcare or healthcare-related manufacturing? Dr.
Yeah, yeah, can you hear me? Yes?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to join you guys today. It's been a kind of a wild ride being added at the last minute, but it's so great, and I appreciate your time, Congressman, and the panelists. So Nist, many people don't know of Nist actually, but we have our main campus in Gaithersburg, Maryland, just outside of the Beltway. And then we have a campus in Boulder, Colorado. We have loved engaging with this Capitol Hill Maker Faire. I'm pretty sure we've participated in all of them. What makes Nist kind of interesting is that we work in all these tech areas. So 3D printing, robotics. I have some colleagues tomorrow who are going to be presenting on that. But it's almost a joke because we're the opposite of makers, because our people are obsessed with precision and accuracy. And they spend years writing documentary standards that tell you exactly how to measure something. And so it's been kind of an interesting experience bringing our colleagues into this maker environment, but they love interacting with people who are just trying to build prototypes and get things done. And so a lot of what Nist does helps advance kind of the whole technology moving forward. Specific to healthcare, you know, we are doing a lot of things more in the technical side with our staff in terms of coming up again with like doing some initial prototype testing or working with other organizations internationally around that standards aspect. You know, we have our workforce is largely at home like everybody else. We have our own technical staff that actually do research on those 2 campuses, and most of them, 99%, are at home right now. It's been interesting to see how they have become kind of their own makers, bringing in some of the parts of their laboratories home to be able to do some experiments. We have a number of people who got permission to bring their own 3D printers home so they could keep prototyping. I know that some of my colleagues participated in a competition that was led by, I believe, FDA, maybe VA actually, with Manufacturing USA Institute, and they got an award for their design for a mask that you could 3D print. So I think we're on the peripheral, and we hope to be able to support makers generally. The last thing I'll say, which is a different flavor but very important potentially to some of the makers, if they want to move into that manufacturer mindset, Nist also is home of the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. So each state has its own Manufacturing Extension Partnership Center that's available to help small manufacturers kind of build to scale and get the resources they need. So I think that's another way that we can help support the makers.
Well, Dr. Evans, as a follow-up, during the early days of COVID-19, the maker community really stepped up to try to help produce PPE. There was a lot of confusion about what was helpful and what wasn't. How can Nist help the maker community be effective in helping out during future crises?
That's a really good question. I agree, it's been very confusing, especially in those early months, because makers, and even not just makers, it could just be even people that I work with who are experts in 3D printing. What they're not expert in is making a validated product that can be used in a healthcare environment, or that can be tested for viruses, or all those things that really needed to happen. So I think we learned a lot through that period. I don't know if you would agree, but it seems that also the whole institution of the organizations that set regulations and requirements also revisited what do we need to do so that we can meet this pandemic call to action. And so I think in some cases we saw that working really well, where some of these emergency use authorizations were enabled and that let people try new things. But at the same time, I do think we could do better next time in terms of trying to figure out what can we measure, what do we know, who knows what. I think the government could do a better job also on that side. And so I hope if something like this happens again, I hope we answer that call a little bit stronger so that people can have the information they need.
Yeah, anyone else on the panel chime in if you can or you want to. I know that we have some people have to be very careful, but Dr. Stone is the one that got me started on this and was telling me, he was excited at the possibility that he had within the VA itself some manufacturing capacity. He was talking about CAD files that could be downloaded, that were available, and that he hoped that would be made more broadly available to the community of makers across the country that could, say, manufacture a nasal swab. But the nasal swab has to be manufactured to a certain level of not only precision, but purity and that sort of thing. You got to have a swab that's not contaminated. And the conditions in which you manufacture have to also be attended to. So anybody want to comment about that, about the possibility that we could ramp up manufacture not only of PPE, but of things like swabs. I understand also that some of the high throughput testing machines need very precisely manufactured trays, or what they call cartridges, but the trays that you have to put the samples in. I'm not talking about the little small machines, but the big machines. That's bottlenecking our testing capacity. And then we have to source parts, repair parts. I mean, we're running the machines 24/7. Not at the VA, but in many other parts of the country. But the parts have to be sourced in Singapore or Switzerland. And do we have are people thinking about these things?
Yeah, Chairman Scott, it's a fantastic question. What I can share with you all is the VA is embarking upon we call it an ADAPT initiative. It's really thinking about agile design and production transformation. And that latter part, production transformation, is really important, because what we see is happening is truly a fundamental shift in the idea of how medical devices are conceived, the prototypes occur. But to your point, Chairman, around, let's take 3D printed nasal swabs for an example. We have to build research infrastructure to be able to test the efficacy and the efficiency, the safety of a new manufactured medical good that's going to be used in clinical care for diagnostic testing. So we have to be able to benchmark against the standard nasal swab. We have to be able to benchmark various different prototypes, find the one that truly works, but then it goes beyond that. What is the sterilization of these? And how do we validate that the sterilization of a newly manufactured swab is safe, so that we can then package and transport these? We're exploring all of this currently. There's 3 medical centers that have emerged as sort of our, we'll call them use cases. These are sites that have amazing infrastructure and expertise. And we're going to be going down and embarking on a lot of the questions that I think are going to be applicable to makers and to healthcare writ large. So it's moving beyond just sort of creating products, but FDA registration and incorporation of GMP certification standards. How do you sort of think about the regulatory requirements that live within a hospital that traditionally lived in a sort of manufacturing realm? And I'll turn it over to Beth, because she meets with the FDA, I think, daily at this point. But these are really big questions that I think VA is leading, and through our partnerships, leading the way to try to resolve. How do we do this within a hospital setting so that we can augment supply of medical devices in the future if we ever need to, but that we can really reimagine what that design and production transformation looks like?
Dr. Ripley, go ahead. Dr. Ripley, you're on mute. Why don't you?
Oh, sorry. Now can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I do want to give a shout out to the Capitol Hill Maker Faire, which is actually where I met Dr. Megan McCarthy from the NIH, that kind of spurred all of the relationships that have culminated in this COVID response that we're doing. So we met at the booth there many years ago, and that led to me meeting the FDA colleagues. So yeah, this community has grown all of this collaboration. And so through those years, we've gotten to know each other well. And so when we saw all of these designs coming out, and some of them, looked great, some of them were a little bit concerning, because, there's a lot of backstory that goes into some of these devices. So we came together, VA, NIH, FDA, along with partner America Makes, to put together a way to rapidly vet designs and share them in one centralized place, which is the NIH 3D Print Exchange. And that was probably one of the fastest interagency agreements in history. We talked on a Sunday afternoon about the need for this, and it actually got signed on Wednesday after that. So 3 days. It's amazing. It's one of the benefits, I guess, one of the...
This was an interagency agreement between the VA and NIH?
And FDA.
And FDA, well, that I was going to say, I wish the heck we could have gotten them here. There's a lot of trepidation, but it's frustrating, because I think everyone's not wanting to be reliant on foreign manufacturing and supply chains that are outside of our country. And we have such a nation of makers that if they were given proper direction and guidelines and designs, etc., we could unleash a lot of, I think, productive capacity in our country. And I think Dr. Stone understands that. But so there's this tripartite agreement, the FDA, which has to approve, given these emergency use agreements, mm-hmm. the NIH and the VA, which actually has all this machinery. Yeah.
So we're working together. So we've been trying to rapidly scale. So I have had a crash course in FDA regs. So I've learned how to read regs, learn all the, what the emergency regs look like, try to decode that. We have some infographics on that are kind of fun for FDA decoded, but we're trying to do some of that. And then we had to figure out within VA how to test these things. So we wanted to be able to test the face shields, the face masks, now the nasal swabs. And it turns out that a lot of the tests, there's great testing standards from many groups. I think Dr. Evans can speak much more eloquently about all of that. But it turns out a lot of those tests are really hard to get to during a pandemic. So we found, things that seem kind of crazy, like, you want to make sure your mask can stop bodily fluids like blood. You really wouldn't want that to go through your mask. And so there's this really complicated recipe to make artificial blood, but the ingredients are sourced like abroad. You can't get it in the US. We're like, what are we going to do? We can't even do the test. We can't even get it, so we're rapidly like Googling and figure out like whole milk at room temperature is somewhat like, it's just, and what are you going to do? So we got really innovative about how to test all of these things too. But bottom line is we've spun up ways to really test these in the clinical space. We've enlisted a lot of our frontline staff to help us with that. And we're issuing those tests out on the NIH website. Our most recent endeavor has been the nasal swabs. Nasal swabs have been made the same way since the 70s. It's not really clear how to test them. So we've spent a lot of energy and time breaking a lot of swabs, swabbing each other quite a lot and trying to get this up. And those are actually up on the NIH website as of this week. So some preliminary testing standards. And all of this is to try to bring exactly what you said, Representative Takano, is that ingredients and instructions to unleash kind of some of the power of American additive manufacturing out there. Some of these things do have to be made in a GMP certified facility. So not all of these are, the type of things you might want to make in a maker space. Some of them are, but I think regardless, being able to understand all of that, wrap it up in a way that's understandable, and then digitally stockpile, this is our new favorite term, digitally stockpile all of these instructions for use, testing, and capabilities so that we're ready and we can deploy goods on demand as needed.
Well, this is a somewhat facetious question, but really not. I mean, this GMC space you're talking about, do you suppose that somebody could make a YouTube video at some point on how to make one of those spaces?
Maybe. It would be a long one. Rachel Drills, is that what you said? Who is it?
Well, I'm just saying, these
yes.
sterile spaces that you got to manufacture, and you will, you can't do it in the maker space per se, but if there were a way to kind of to instruct, because there are builders and construction people out there and people that can specialize in all this, I'm sure.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, we have the machines, but we also can create the environments in which those machines have to operate and understand, the materials that used. But the manufacturing process is quite complex. Dr. Evans, do you have anything to say about that?
Well, I was just thinking another thing so at Nist, what we've done is at the end of March, we rapidly stood up a crowdsourcing project, mostly actually internal to Nist, asking our employees, hey, everyone, we know you're at home. Do you have ideas about projects that if we supported could really make a difference for COVID-19? And through that crowdsourcing, we actually got an idea that bubbled up that we ended up following through on, where some of our chemists so one thing that Nist does is, like I mentioned, really measure things really well. So we already had a standard reference material that's a set of ethanols. So what our folks did is they reached out to the Manufacturing Extension Partnership actually and talked to some small manufacturers and learned that they were having some issues with hand sanitizers that they were ordering maybe for their own operations that were like smelling like whiskey or weirdly colored, and they wanted to know, are these safe or not? And at the same time, we were also working with some of the local law enforcement who was saying, we're not sure some of this stuff is safe, because there are these great, really well-meaning efforts to spin up distilleries, right? Stopped manufacturing booze and started making hand sanitizer, but they weren't your traditional manufacturers either. So Nist really tried to spin up some measurements that we could put out to the community to say, look, this is what you need to be able to measure. It's still a little bit high end to what Dr. Ripley was mentioning, the instrumentation sometimes, it's still NMR measurements, which is like a nuclear magnetic resonance, but at least getting that information out there and showing like what should you expect and whether or not it's safe is something where we've been trying to play a role. It's not necessarily, we're not regulators in that space, but just putting the information and data out there has been helpful. And that's something I hadn't even thought about, because, you know, it's true though, there's this whole new industry that spun up of everyone trying to help make hand sanitizer. I don't know if my colleagues from the VA have also been thinking about that.
You know, Dr. Ripley or Dr. Vega, do you have a response?
I will say I do know in the Seattle area here, we have a lot of small batch distilleries who have turned over their regular distilling activities to create hand sanitizer. So again, I think a fantastic example. I haven't gone down there yet, but actually for 3D printing materials, isopropyl alcohol is a really important needed resource we need for all of the SLA type printers that we're printing with. And that is in really short supply right now, and we're having trouble getting that. So I actually was thinking of going over and chatting with our neighbors down in the Ballard area and see what we can do for that.
Well, thank you. This is a very facetious comment I'm going to make, but I think we need some of these distilleries to figure out how to make reagents for the for the testing machinery. But I understand that the reagents are all very proprietary according to who manufactures it. So it's not exactly. But theoretically, there should be a community of people out there more specialized that. We need to figure out how to do that here because the reagent supply, some of it's domestic, but a lot of it's, outside of the country.
Congressman Takano, I actually have to jump in. You've got to go vote and then head straight to committee. So I'm going to take over and run the rest of this panel. You never know when votes are going to get called around here.
All right. Well, this was too fun. I could have stayed here for a long, long time. And I can tell by the vivacity on your faces. I mean, the enthusiasm that you are all very enthusiastic about the work that you do, and that this virus, this COVID-19 pandemic, has not dampened your spirits. And I especially want to thank who was that guy that sent me whoever sent me the tip on that the 4 ounces ought to be enough. I'm very grateful. My kitchen. I won't be back for another week and a half, but hopefully wish me luck on repairing my stand mixer. Okay, thanks.
So if no one has an objection, I'm going to be taking over now, and I hope you all can hear me. We have a bunch more questions. The first I kind of wanted to ask, our wonderful VA panelists. Are there other private sector initiatives that you are witnessing and excited to kind of implement at the VA in the near or long-term future? Whether it's more of the bioprinting. For years we've been talking about the idea of printing hearts, but what is a little bit more in your near future?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of things, and I'll let Beth get into some of the weeds on. I think our philosophy is that, and I think COVID really illustrated this more than anything, is that we're going to have to sort of democratize the knowledge around the recipes, the blueprints, the prototypes, the designs, and the requirements to really unleash sort of the potential of innovation across America. When we were starting this initiative around ADAPT, there's a health system in Maryland who partnered with Under Armour to begin producing gowns and face shields. They actually stood up a manufacturing plant across the hospital, and Under Armour came in and was helping them sew these together really quickly. So, you know, it was the ability to connect with them and learn from their experience that helped inform our experience and what's driving now. I think that we're going to see a proliferation of new design technology, additive manufacturing, bioprinting, and this idea of moving it within the walls of the hospital, which is sort of a paradigm shift. And I think it's really going to be imperative that we collaborate and learn from one another, that there's not this, and the chairman had mentioned this, you know, this proprietary notion of we're going to hoard the information. The only way I think we're really going to be able to collectively move forward together is we've sort of democratized that knowledge and sharing and sort of really unleash potential. And Beth can share with you all some of the specific partnerships we have that are going on, really bringing that private sector expertise into the VA.
Yeah. Again, just bringing
Good to
back
see you, Beth, by the way.
Good to see you. Hey. Just bringing back again that idea about the community. In this community, one of my favorite things about making is just how collaborative it is, you know, and it's really refreshing coming from, you know, research, and, you know, medicine's pretty collaborative. Research can be a little bit more challenging, you know, you want to hold your ideas for yourself. This community is amazing and collaborative. And so, you know, we've had so many partners in this, you know, between all our academic affiliates. You know, Mayo Clinic has been amazing. Dr. Jane Matsumoto and Dr. Jay Morris, who've been leading their activities for the past decade, really stepped up to help with VA. And we have a lot of great private OEM or, you know, manufacturing collaborations too. I mentioned Advanced Solutions Life Sciences, who is working with us for BioBone. We partner with General Electric, GE Healthcare, to think about how to make software easier to use so that we can translate these medical imaging data sets into models. We've worked with Form Labs to think about another 3D printing manufacturer to think about how to create custom foot orthotics. Stratasys was one of our partners that launched the network originally and took us from 3 to 8 hospitals, and you know, so many more. And I think, you know, sometimes there's some, again, we talked about trepidation and worry and trying to figure out where do we draw the line. But I think in this community and in this country, we're all together trying to move forward on how we, you know, change lives for the better, whether it's healthcare during normal times or pandemic times. And all of these partnerships have just been key.
Yeah, you know, it's such an interesting dynamic here in Congress when we're discussing the maker movement. There are two things that people here just cannot wrap their heads around. One is that the final product doesn't need to work for you to get a passing grade in the maker movement, right? Like the process is the most important part, and you need to learn why it doesn't work. More importantly than whether it magically works and you have no idea what you did or not, right? That's something that's really hard to get to people's head. And then also this idea that inventors want to share the knowledge that they have learned because it makes their product and other products better and more accessible, right? There is oftentimes this push to just immediately slap a patent on it and protect it and hide it from everyone else, and that is just so not the way that the maker movement always, you know, works. And I'm not throwing USPTO under the bus. They're our friends and we work with them on lots of stuff. And they've been really wonderful to the maker movement. But these are just two different kind of things that are inherent to the maker movement that Congress has had a really hard time trying to grasp. So that, you know, all of this follows up to the next question. This is for all three of the panelists, is what does the next iteration of maker outreach look like? Is it, you know, is it a VA maker fair? Is it a make-a-thon with, you know, with some of these groups that do a really good job of doing disability kind of make-a-thon planning? Is it a healthcare maker summit? Like, what are we looking at? And the same thing goes for Nist, right? What can the federal government do to bring more makers in, and, you know, and recruit them to work in the government, because I always like that, but or recruit them to just become sort of citizen activists who are helping. Anybody?
I'll go first.
Yes.
So I love the idea of and we're biased, right? I love the idea of a VA-led initiative. I think what's really vital as we bring this community together, there's two components. It's the idea share. I think it's the ability to hear from experts in the field who are advancing, whether it's printing or additive manufacturing. But I also think a really important component for any event going forward is how we introduce the idea of workforce development, right? Series of learning where we bring people together to teach new skills, whether it's you're a private citizen and you want to better understand how to support additive manufacturing for pre-surgical planning, right? There's some precision around utilizing the software and getting it right that then can be handed off to the clinicians to make it useful. What does the curriculum around that look like? What are the competencies that we need in healthcare writ large to really advance the use of additive manufacturing beyond? So how does the maker community get involved in that? I think those conversations and discussions and how we have the ability to hold conferences where we offer those types of solutions, not just to people in the healthcare field, but to undergraduate and even high school or future STEM learners who are interested in how this technology will really change, I think, modern medicine, but also society in a lot of ways.
Great. And Heather, would you like to speak a little bit about what Nist is going to be doing in the future to reach more makers and participate?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think specific to the technologies that we just talked about, I don't have a ready perfect answer, but I think thinking big term, one tool that we use a lot is prize competitions. And so I would really encourage folks to always be looking at challenge.gov. I can't help but promote it.
Yeah.
But there's so many great opportunities on there. Sometimes they're very technical and kind of hard to understand, but look for those opportunities where maybe you could contribute, because I know that Nist, our public safety program, is working really hard to come up with technology solutions for first responders, and they have several prizes on there. And the whole point of that is to get people with different ideas and backgrounds to think about a problem differently. And so that's one thing that we're continuing to do. We have, like I said, we have some that are live on there right now. So I'd love any more attention on those would be great.
Yeah. Okay. So to wrap this up, I have one last kind of light question. And the question is, for our panelists, have any of you tried to learn some new skills or tackled a big project during quarantine that you want to share?
I've actually been supervising my partner as he tries to refinish a bunch of wood. So we have this desk that I'm sitting at. It's not quite finished, but learned a lot about different coatings and how to do sanding. So that's been kind of fun.
Yeah, that's great. Dr. Ripley?
Well, you know, my newest idea, well, it's not mine. It's a collaboration, because all great ideas are a collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we got bees, we have honeybees, and now I'm really interested in this idea about, can we 3D print some special little, slots to go in there so we could like make macro cells and pop out little honeycombs. So.
Oh, wow. You know, you should have a conversation with USDA. USDA has a bee farm on top of their building in Washington, D.C.
Oh, really?
It is a fascinating thing. And if you're nice to them, they'll show you around and give you honey from there. It's really, really pretty cool. That's really exciting. And I'm more than happy to trade our homemade hot sauce, which is something we've been doing in quarantine, for some of your honey.
Excellent.
And Dr. Vega.
Yeah, I attempted to make my first batch of craft beer. I have a lot of work to do.
My lovely fiance and myself, we are 3-time winners. We've come in second and third in the Capitol Hill Homebrewers competition. So
Really?
if you're looking for some advice, I'm happy to share the little bit of knowledge that I have as well. We just finished a couple of batches of triple IPA, so we're pretty excited. So, I stick to it. The first time you get you feel a little bit of a buzz from your own beer is an interesting experience in and of itself.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say thank you to all of our panelists. You are really just doing wonderful work here, and this is really informative. You've really inspired Congressman Takano to continue to work on this stuff. He was really excited to hear that you were going to be all be involved. For our VA panelists, we would love to be as supportive as possible. And so think of us as an ally and a resource. And Dr. Ripley, I just really appreciate you making that note about making a connection at the Capitol Hill Maker Faire. I think as someone who's helped put this on for the last 5 years, that's what we're trying to do, is to bring people together to share good ideas. And so that's really meaningful that you'd share that. We are going to be moving on to the next panel in a little bit. I just wanted to remind everyone that the next panel is on corporations, and to remind you to all use the hashtag CapMakerFair, and our handle is Maker Caucus, and the other handles for the Nation of Makers and IMLS. Participate online. Let us know what you're thinking. If you have any follow-up questions, we'd love to hear from you. And with that, we are going to wrap here.